Hello, everyone, and welcome. Hope you're having a good morning. I'm Stefan Corsell, one of the acupuncturists from the Chanda Center for Health. And today I've invited Oliver, one of our participants, and I'll let him just say a few words about himself.
Yeah, hi, Stefan. Thanks for inviting me today. As mentioned, my name is Oliver Giminero. I'm a participant at the Chanda Center. I'm spinal cord injury C4 complete for 28 years now. And yeah, I don't know, I've got a background in engineering.
Thanks, Oliver. So I invited Oliver today because over the time I've known Oliver, we often have discussions along these lines, and I feel, especially a little bit later, although along the way as well, that he can offer some really good things based on his experience with both breath work and mindfulness work. And the breath work, particularly stuff that he's found has been helpful just for his respiratory and immune health. And then, of course, the mindfulness that also helps support our immune system and helps manage, hopefully, our stress during this very challenging time. So as I said before, trying to offer these as a tool for all of us during this time of challenge and trying to figure out how best to support ourselves. Everything that we'll be talking about are ways to help keep ourselves in the best possible place by supporting our immune system and then also trying to manage our stress in ways that are going to be helpful to us and allow us to be more present and be able to make good decisions about what we can do to move forward. So today I'm going to spend a little bit of time just reviewing some of the nutrition that we talked about. I talked about a couple weeks ago, some of the things that are particularly important about that. I'm going to add a little information about some specific foods and herbs that can be helpful as well, particularly at different stages, both for prevention and for treating viral illnesses throughout the course. And so there's been a lot of information coming out based on what we already know and things that would be potentially helpful based on some recent research that's come out and based on what we know for viruses specifically. But a lot of this isn't necessarily specific to COVID, but are ways to help support ourselves. And there is good evidence that it would be helpful because of its just overall antiviral effects. So I will do that. And then we're going to talk, just reinforce some of the ideas around movement and its importance in both stress management and immunity. And of course, those two things go hand in hand. So the better we're managing our stress, that's going to help support our immune system. And the better our immune system is, the better it's going to be able to manage stressors. The mindfulness piece, along with that humor, and some ideas about how we can kind of get out of ourselves and be more present for our community, each other as well. So I had a little thing I wanted to just share that I thought was particularly helpful. And pull that up. So I'm going to start with talking about diet, and I wanted to just, I saw this and thought this was really appropriate. So your diet is not only what you eat, it is what you watch, what you listen to, what you read, the people that you hang around. Pay attention to what you feed your soul, not just your stomach. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is trying to tap into all that, is nourishing ourselves completely. So food is a very specific way of doing that, but all those other ways are ways that we can also be nourishing ourselves well. All right, so in the first talk that I did 2 weeks ago, I talked very specifically about nutrition and some of the benefits of that. So I'm going to just do a quick review of that, and then I wanted to, like I said, focus a little bit more on things that we know specifically can be helpful, both proactively and then at certain stages along the way. So I talked about what's going to be most helpful is getting lots of plant nutrition. That doesn't necessarily mean to the exclusion of animal proteins, But the plant foods are going to be the best, and we're going to talk more specifically about that as far as getting these specific nutrients. They're going to help support our immune system as well as help manage our stress. And so those things, again, I'm going to just do a quicker review. I did include, and I'll show you guys a one-page sheet that also talks about all of this in the comment section of the last video I did, and I will also include that again this time. But some of the things that we want to be mindful of is vitamin A or beta carotene. It's particularly helpful for anti-inflammatory effects, which, as I talked about initially, the inflammation is one of the biggest concerns if we do get any kind of viral respiratory infection. If there's an over-activation of the inflammatory response, which is part of the immune response, that's where we can get in difficulty and where we can have the cytokine storm, and those are the type of situations where people land up in the ICU on ventilators and potentially dying. So managing inflammation without negatively impacting the immune system response is really helpful. And so all the things we're going to talk about is trying to straddle that line. Vitamin A, in addition, is very helpful for the mucus lining of the respiratory system. And that's really important because COVID, one of the ways that it is affecting the lungs is that surface level, and it's allowing where the air exchange occurs in the little alveoli to collapse. And so vitamin A really helps protect that mucus lining, makes it more difficult for the virus to basically take away that lining, allowing the virus to penetrate more deeply into the lungs. Likewise, it also helps protect the digestive barrier. And as I've talked about multiple times and at our previous talk, the immune system is really dependent on good digestive function. And in fact, many of the cells that are responsible for good immune function are basically developed, nurtured through the gut system itself. Then we have vitamin C as a powerful anti-inflammatory. Again, very helpful for that mucus lining that we really need to be protecting, because it can, if that mucus lining gets compromised, it's going to increase the intensity of any illness, and particularly with this current virus that we're all kind of dealing with, or at least is in our community. Vitamin D, important for T cells, really important part of our immune system response, has been shown specifically proactively to help prevent, through research, the risk for both viral and respiratory diseases. So both of those fall in that category. So really good to be getting those up. And then vitamin E, again, good for that mucus lining and kind of maintaining that barrier. We have a couple minerals as well. Selenium, which is a powerful antioxidant, helps decrease inflammation and overactive response of that inflammation during an acute crisis. Zinc, another really important proactive mineral to get in. It's helpful in both the development and function of immune cells, and it also helps and has been shown to increase the number of white cells. And lastly, I talked about copper. They're still unsure of the specific effects with the immune system. They know that it works along with zinc. And most importantly, the one thing they do know is that if there's a deficiency of copper, that is associated with an increase of infection. So even though we don't know the mechanism, we know if there's a deficiency of that, that's going to be a problem. And then, again, this list is available, and I also included some other links that would be helpful. But for that vitamin A, things like squashes, sweet potatoes, dark leafy greens. You can also get some good vitamin A from butter and eggs for some animal proteins. Broccoli is another good one. So not exclusively, obviously, but a lot of the orange and yellow foods in particular can be high in vitamin A. Vitamin C, kiwi fruit's one of the highest in vitamin C as far as the fruit. Bell peppers being one of the highest as far as veggies. All citrus, strawberries, papaya, mango, leafy greens again, tomatoes, all pretty high in vitamin C. For our D, we of course have fish, a lot of mushrooms, maitake and portobello in particular are pretty good. Some B vitamins, eggs, and sunlight. So that's all for vitamin D. And as I mentioned before in my talks, most of us tend to be low in D, especially this time of year, late winter going into spring now, so can be beneficial to increase our intake of that. I think anywhere between 2,000 and 5,000 right now is a really good, safe dosage. If you know your levels are low, you can go up on a little higher side. If you're not, good 2,000 is definitely going to give you some good support. For our minerals, the selenium, a lot of nuts and seeds are going to be particularly helpful. Brown rice has a good amount of selenium. Some poultry for some animal protein, and fish again. Mushrooms, another good source for immune support. We'll be talking some more about those as we move along a little bit further. For the zinc, again, seeds, legumes are good for zinc, chickpeas, lentils in particular. We have our nuts again, cashews, almonds being particularly good. Cocoa powder, always a good one, to easy for people to get in. A little dairy and poultry again. And then for copper, dark chocolate, seeds and nuts again, some legumes, including chickpeas, lentils, avocado. So again, as with many of my talks, you'll see several of those foods are on the list several times. And so it's really not that hard. The main thing is to just try and keep a variety in our diet, and trying to be getting a lot of different colors in our diet. And that's going to be most helpful. I additionally talked a little bit about some other nutrients that are both good for stress management and helping support the immune function. So one of those would be the B vitamins, of course, again. So deficiency with the B vitamins results in immune deficiency. And it's really important for, sorry, I'm trying to pull something up here while I'm talking. Trying to manage stress. When we're more stressed, we consume more B vitamins. And when we are and the more B we consume, it gives us a little bit more ability to manage those B vitamins. So as far as getting those Bs in, lots of beans and legumes really good. Leafy greens can be a good source of our B vitamins, and as well as some of our legumes and beans. Fats can be really helpful for the inflammatory response, both of the immune system and helping manage stress. So again, avocado, seeds, and nuts. We can add some additional supplemental oils to our diet. Probiotics and prebiotics, prebiotics being our fibers. So trying to, again, if you're eating some of those produce, some of the produce that we talked about prior, you're going to be getting those good things in. Potentially eating some fermented cultured foods, cultured dairy, sauerkrauts, good pickled veggies, stuff along those lines is going to really help support all that. So I did want to talk, I spoke just a little bit last time we talked about nutrition, and I referred a little bit to Dr. Weil and some of the information that he has put out through the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. And so he talks a little more specifically, both with nutrition and herbs, about the different stages of treatment and what research is showing, both historically and with this current pandemic, the things that need to be addressed. So for looking at this from a dietary or supplement area, the 4 areas that was addressed is obviously trying to prevent infection. Once we are affected, once we're exposed to that virus, trying to stop the replication of the virus and allowing it to spread so that it overwhelms the immune system. Lastly is next, as I've touched upon before, managing the inflammation, inhibiting an excess of inflammation. So what's called the cytokine storm. And then the last strategy would be, what can we do to hasten recovery if we are to get sick? So again, we're going to be talking about some of the other things that go in it, but I'm going to cover this and then we're going to move on to the other ones. So for prevention of the entry of the virus getting into the body, astragalus, which is a herb that's been used in Chinese medicine for a long time, has been really shown to be helpful for supporting the immune system proactively, helping prevent infections, helping build up the immune system. We also have quercetin. Quercetin is found in largest quantities in apples and onions, so it's a great time to be eating those because we're going to be talking about that in each of these stages, basically. So quercetin can be a really good antiviral agent and can kind of prevent that virus from really being able to get itself established in our body. And lastly, we had just talked about vitamin D3, and that is another one on the preventative side. So these are things that they're documenting as being shown to be particularly helpful for this current situation based on prior history and its use in places like Asia and Europe as they've been dealing with this virus as well. So the next stage is where it actually attaches and starts to replicate, starts to reproduce, gets into cells and starts to take them over. So elderberry is one of the things that can be most helpful at that stage. Also can be really helpful to be used again proactively before we do get infected. Elderberry can be particularly helpful in that very early stage before symptoms. There are some concerns, and on the side of caution, that elderberry can somewhat significantly increase the inflammatory response of the immune response. So it is recommended that if you were to start to exhibit symptoms of a respiratory illness, that's a good time to stop the elderberry and switch to some of the other things that we've talked about prior. The replication part, the reproduction of the cells, basically zinc can really inhibit that. And the quercetin that I just talked about as a proactive agent also helps with the metabolism. It helps chelate zinc, helps get it into the cells of the body where we want it to be. So quercetin and EGCG, which is a particular component of green tea, really in all teas, but in highest concentrations in green tea. So both this quercetin and EGCG are things that you can get in dietarily. They are also available as supplements. And being tea and the quercetin coming from food sources is considered a really safe thing to do, and it's not going to have concerns about interactions with other substances. If you are taking zinc supplementally, the recommended dosing is 15 to 30 milligrams a day. And so if you haven't done it before, you can start on a little higher side. I think 15 to 20 is a good maintenance dose to kind of maintain and sustain if you are wanting to supplement. There has been discussion since the beginning of this about the effectiveness of zinc lozenges. And in fact, there is some evidence of efficacy of using zinc lozenges and allowing those secretions to dissolve and kind of settle into the back of the throat. So it's actually recommended to be back a little bit, let the stuff sit back there, and that it can actually interfere with the virus's ability to replicate and then migrate further on down to the lungs. So typically we inhale this, it gets into our nasopharynx area, it starts to reproduce to the point where then it can migrate down into the lungs. And so it's a great point to try to interfere with that process. And then
Yeah, I just
last,
want to add,
of course, the preventative part is the trying to improve immunity, kind of get that along. Were you saying something, Oliver? Sorry, I thought I heard something.
yeah, sorry, real quick. I just want to add something on the zinc. I think that's where the effectiveness of those medicines like Zicam and stuff come in effect. It's that zinc affects the virus.
Great. Thank you, Oliver. Yeah, right. So, so I kind of discussed the kind of try and prevent it and then trying to stop it from really getting established. The next step, of course, is trying to manage that inflammatory piece. And so the recommendations, of course, as always, is to try and get in more veggies and fruits, which we know is good for our health. So trying to get as close as we can to those 5 to 7 servings of veggies and at least 2 or 3 of fruit. Trying to mix it up, trying to just add fruits or veggies to most of what you're eating. I've been doing a lot more smoothies for the families at home, and that's a good way to get a lot of that stuff in as well. Just throwing in the whole foods and blending those up. So some of the things that have been found to be particularly helpful for managing the inflammatory piece, which is the most dangerous part of the virus, is not the virus, but the body's response to the virus is this over-inflammatory response. Vitamin C is number 1. So we already talked about those veggies, how important they are for the immune system. And so it helps the immune system respond to the virus without an overactivation of that inflammatory process. Melatonin is another thing that also has very strong anti-inflammatory effects. And there's more and more discussion of using it at higher dosages, particularly for its immune enhancing response and for its strong anti-inflammatory response. So that would be something to consider as well. So the plant flavonoids in particular are known to have an anti-inflammatory effect, and that's why they're part of the anti-inflammatory diet. The quercetin, again, is really high up there, along with the vitamin C for the anti-inflammatory effect. Garlic really has been shown itself to be really helpful for supporting the immune system, helping prevent with both bacterial and viral infections, and decreasing that inflammatory response. The green tea, turmeric, so using the turmeric root or using some as a supplement. Typically, it's extracted out as curcumin, the active ingredient. Pretty powerful anti-inflammatory systemically and definitely helpful for the immune system. We have some herbs, specifically skullcap and licorice root, which have been shown to also have pretty pronounced anti-inflammatory effects during acute infections. And those are both in many of the antiviral immune supporting Chinese herbal formulas. And there are several that have been used with some success managing this current situation and have a long history of use in helping support good immune system response. Mushrooms, again, we talked about them nutritionally, also really helpful for managing the inflammation. One caveat with that is that we want to ideally be using whole mushrooms, so either as a food or as a supplement. There are some extracts, typically glucans, which are from the mycelium, which are basically like the root structure, which is actually the main organism. The mushroom itself is the fruiting body. But for the purposes of our discussion, for using it for immune support and particularly for inflammation support, you definitely want to be doing a whole mushroom or whole mushroom extract. Some of the other foods that have been specifically noted for their anti-inflammatory effect: tomatoes and oranges, that's partially the vitamin C; nuts and berries because of the moistening action, and that's really particularly helpful. I talked about the mucus barrier in both the respiratory and digestive system and some of those nutrients and how they support that in a way of supporting the immune system. And so trying to get some of those good fats into our diet would be really good. And chamomile, parsley, and celery are some other fruits that are specifically cited for their anti-inflammatory effects. So I'm going to start to transition to talking about some of the other topics that we're going to talk today, as far as just trying to nourish ourselves completely and managing well. Oliver, do you have anything to add before we kind of switch gears here?
No, I just really like the part where you talk about how we can access the food through whole foods. I know for myself personally, like I've really increased my like nuts and avocados intake. It's just something like the seeds and nuts I can just grab some really easily and just snack on. So I really appreciate that, Vi. So thank you.
Great, yeah. And so if you've attended any of my Nourishing for Nutrition classes, many of the foods that we're talking about are, are things that have been encouraged that also help support all of that. And so obviously we know it's all interconnected, and that I appreciate what you brought up, Oliver. Diet is the best way to do it. And so it's kind of doing it over time. I'm mentioning some of these other things based on the research, because for some of us, if we haven't been as good with our diet and we're wanting to boost up stuff, I wanted to just go over, if you're going to pursue some of those things, what are the things that are going to be most helpful as far as kind of trying to get some of that in supplementally to boost yourself up in the short term. And I mentioned in the first talk, and I'll reinforce again, that if you are considering taking supplements, these are a general guide. I would certainly recommend you talking to one of your healthcare practitioners, whether it be one of your providers at the Chanda Center or your primary care doc. I have a few people I'm working with right now that I've made some of these recommendations, and they've run them by their doctors, and the doctors have been pretty receptive. So it is good to get some guidance along the way, especially if you're going to try and add some supplements versus just doing it through diet. So, so with the stress part of things, I really wanted to, let's see if I can pull this up online to show you people. It's all right. Right. So I shared the information from this last time, but I think this is a really good little graphic here. We're going to be talking a lot about the stress management, the healthy eating we just went over, movement. So movement is really helpful in keeping our immune system strong. It also is a great way to dissipate some of the inflammation and pain that can oftentimes be physical manifestations of that. Of course, trying to limit any kind of respiratory distressors. So not smoking, vaping, inhaling anything. As I mentioned last time, that would include things like trying not to be doing a lot of painting, things along those lines, where you would be exposing your lungs to some of those types of toxins. The importance of quality sleep, and how do we achieve that? And so activity is one of the ways that we can achieve that. Some of that good nutrition, particularly the B vitamins, and then some of the breathing and mindfulness stuff that Oliver's going to be talking about in a couple of minutes can also be really helpful. And then lastly, we have the connecting with others. And so I think that's really important, is like, how do we keep that connection? And so trying to find ways, kind of like we're trying to stay connected this way through doing video sessions, FaceTime, I know my younger daughters have had some watch parties with people where they're talking while they're watching something, etc. So things along those lines can be really helpful. I think it's can be really different for everybody. So I think some of the things that just like to throw out ideas is like music can be really good. There are a lot of really good options for stress relieving music. Stephen Halpern is a great one for that. There's a lot of other options as well, the environmental sounds, things like that. Humor. So having a conversation, laughing with friends, watching something funny has been shown to have a direct effect on our immune system response, and it is a great way to help reduce our stress. I think during times of stress, it can be overwhelming, particularly a situation like this. It's been pretty big, but trying to work to a point where we feel like we can have some control. And that's where the mindfulness stuff that Oliver's going to be chatting more about in a minute will be coming particularly helpful. But stress can be a great motivator if we can work with it and not let it overwhelm us. If everything's easy and comfortable, it can be easy to kind of just sit back. Stress can kind of force action and get us to do things, take better care of ourselves, get things started. And so looking at ways of how we can use that stress response and use it to motivate ourselves to take control in a time where we might feel not under control. It can be hard during times of high stress to think about helping others, but it has been shown again and again to be one of the most helpful ways to get ourselves out of our own head and our own concerns and to be helping others. And so that can be as easy as a phone conversation with somebody, helping out with a little task, a little support. It doesn't have to be anything physical. It can be emotional help, kind of keeping that virtual social connections going. The body work. So last week I talked about some acupressure, and I'm going to be doing another video kind of reviewing what we talked about last time and putting it together more, some protocols where you can do certain groups of points together, and then probably add some points just for overall neurologic support as well. And the importance of our environment and just both of our immune system, wellness, and our stress management. So being mindful of things about lighting. I think particularly right now, trying to allow as much natural lighting into our space as possible. Ideally and hopefully everyone's able to get out somewhere on a porch, a backyard, for a short walk in the neighborhood where there's not a lot of people. That would be ideal. But if you're not in a situation where you really can get out of the house, trying to spend more time by an open window, trying to really let that light in. You can use even a mirror to help reflect some of that light and get a little bit more light into your space. Temperature and humidity is really important. And so keeping, temperature is going to be different for everyone, but we want to keep it feeling pretty neutral for us. The humidity is something that's particularly important. So mentioned a couple times that mucus lining and surface of the lungs. And so the virus can really affect that. Dryness can really affect it. And so I don't know if people have been hearing, but there has been talk about how dryness can exacerbate our tendency to get a virus and also to have a more pronounced presentation of that virus. And so ideally, we're trying to keep our humidity in around the 40 to 45 degree range. And if anything, you can go a little bit higher than that, but you really don't want to be going much higher than that. So I think 40, 45, most of the research indicates is a pretty good range. And that's going to help us sleep better, and that's going to also help protect those lungs and keep them a little bit healthier. So those were some of the general things that I wanted to just touch upon. And we might talk a little bit more about those, but I want to hand it over to Oliver and talk a little bit about his experience with his respiratory health and some of the stuff he's done with breathing. He's come across some really good research as far as some specific strategies to help, especially with, he'll talk about the nitrous oxide piece of things, and then some of the mindfulness stuff that we'll both kind of chime in and chat about. So Oliver, I'll hand it over to you.
Sorry, I had a hard time unmuting there. Thank you, Stefan. Yeah, so as we all know, breath is a really important part in our existence as humans. You know, we can't go very long without it. You know, most of us a couple minutes, even the best deep ocean divers can do, you know, like 6 minutes, but we need breath. Just a little, share some experiences of myself. When I first got injured 28 years ago, C4, my lungs were severely affected. My left lung was totally collapsed. My right lung was more than less than 50% functioning. I had to go on a vent for a couple weeks. So that just really enforced, ingrained at me at a young age, at 15 years old, how important it is to breathe, and how when you don't have your breath, how serious and scary. It's really scary, scary thing. So I was lucky enough when I first got injured to be introduced to some pretty neat people that introduced me to meditation, introduced me to chanting. And so just really first, I guess I'll just go over some things about chanting that I think are really, really helpful for my own self. And then we'll get in more into that mindful meditation part. So I just like to say that chanting, and really I like to call it humming. I think chanting can kind of get caught up in what you say or how you say it or different types, but I think what really is most important is just to get that vibration, that try to make our abdominal cavity resonate, try to get our cells to resonate. I really like Om. The idea is being our cells are all rotating and they're always vibrating. And so when we hum or chant, those cells through harmonics become aligned and vibrate at the same rate. And that's really beneficial to us just on a molecular level. And then you mentioned nitrous oxide humming. They found there's research articles that have found just humming in your nasal when you have a breath of full air. So if you like breathe in and hum that increases nitrous oxide production 10 to 15 times. And nitrous oxide is a really important molecule in all kinds of different things. It promotes red blood cell growth. It promotes interaction of your immune system. There's even effects on your central nervous system. So just humming in your nose, in your sinuses is really, really beneficial to ourselves as a being, just on the molecular level. Yeah, and so humming allows us to, you want to try to take a deep breath. You want to try to feel, I mean, I've been kind of taught that there's 3 parts of our breath, our lower part, our middle part, and our upper part of our lungs. We very rarely breathe into our middle and upper parts. And so when I do some humming, I want to take a deep, deep breath. I want to inhale my middle parts of my ribs. Let's see if I can tilt this down and maybe even show you a little bit more. So when I breathe in, I want to try to get my ribs to expand. So I breathe in my belly, and then I breathe in my middle, and then I breathe in my upper. And so when you're breathing, you want to really try to get your ribs to expand. You really want your intercostal muscles to expand, even though I don't have like great control over those muscles due to my injury. Just taking in that deep breath will still allow those muscles to expand. And you can allow them to innervate and expand. So even if I don't have control, I can still expand those and allow my ribs to separate just through my breath. And so I think that's really valuable to get in that space. You might find yourself trying to cough. And taking a deep breath is, it's an act of courage. It's hard to take a deep breath. When we take a deep breath, all kinds of emotions can come up. You can cough. Our brains are so ready to judge and quick to judge. I'll talk a little bit more about that in our mindfulness. When you go to take a deep breath, your brain is, you're not doing it right. This is wrong. You need to exhale. All these thoughts start coming through our head. I should have called my friend, or whatever it is. So you want to be aware, and you want to be willing to go there and willing to take that deep breath and have the courage and, believe in yourself that that breath is what's natural, and you want to be able to be breathed into that breath. So just allow yourself to have that. Next, I want to talk a little bit about some mindfulness stuff. Stefan has a document that we can connect to where I talk a little bit. It's a PDF, but I kind of broke it down into 2 different areas of mindfulness. I list them as psychological outcomes, and these are, it's like a neuroplasticity thing where the more your brain does something, it creates pathways, and then those pathways become your new normal. And so there's some psychological outcomes that are neuroplasticity. And then there's also, what's really, really excites me, it's a newer, well, it's been around for a decade or something, but they're discovering that it's epigenetics. And this is the way our genes express themselves. I've heard it described as, so our DNA are like a library, and the books on the library shelves never change. The DNA never changed. But the librarian can take those books and put them up on a display rack right in the front of the building. So when you first walk in, those are the books you see. That's kind of the way I've heard epigenetics. It's your body's ability to express certain genes. So you can express certain genes more than you can express other genes. And through meditation and the relaxation response, even being quiet, humming, going for a walk in nature, allowing yourself to get that relaxation response is enough to induce these changes in your gene expression. So that's just super exciting to me. And I just think it's so amazing that how you think can actually change our genetic expression. It's amazing. So in the document I prepared, I once had a professor tell me, if you want to seek the real information, go to journal articles. So I listed some effects that meditation has, broken up into those 2 different groups. And then I put reference articles, so you can visit a journal article and kind of dig deep and investigate it, and learn all you want to learn. Don't just take my word for it.
So I have that up on the screen now, Oliver. I don't know if you noticed, and I will make sure to include that as a resource for people that you can access on the comments after the video is posted online.
Great, thank you. And so I'm not going to go through all the lists right now. I know we've got time, and I feel you can do that on your own. But I'd like to list just a few things that really came up, especially at this time when we're worried about our immune systems and being as healthy as we can. So there's been several studies that mindfulness changes your immune regulation. That's down in the lower part. So that's really neat. Articles 8 and 10. Also, decreased inflammation. Stefan was talking about that on a cellular level. That's really big because that's one of the mechanisms that the COVID attacks. It's the inflammation response. So that pertains directly to this. Also, on the one above, it's actually been shown to increase antibodies which attack the viruses. They're our body's own natural defense. Immunoglobulin, I'm pronouncing it wrong, but it's been shown to increase those antibodies, and so I included some of those articles. So yeah, I encourage you just to look at this, go over it. Maybe there's some things that you might find that pertain directly to you, and then I encourage you to look at some of the journal articles. I know some of them can be quite technical. I always find it even handy just to read the abstract or the conclusion. It just helps me get some more information. And if I want to dive deep, I can go into the article and do that.
Yeah, I think that's a great resource. I think it's really important because these are things we hear a lot about and can be maybe dismissed or not thought of as having a profound effect on both our mental, emotional state, but also our physical body. And so it's great that this research has been put out there. And Oliver, I appreciate you being able to compile all this and put it together, because it gives you a nice little reference to work off of, and just kind of reaffirming that this is a helpful thing to do.
Yeah, a lot of times I think meditation or mindfulness gets kind of a bum rap. People tend to associate it with kind of fuzzy woo things, and or some people think it's like a religious practice, and although people have made those connections in the past, for me that's not what it's about. It's something concrete. It's real. The relaxation response is our body's kind of negative response to stress response, or I'll say it's the opposite response, or it's kind of the yin to the yang of stress. So relaxation response, which is another word for meditation or mindfulness, can just have all these incredible effects. And there's some real science behind it. There's some real definite science and research, and it's coming on more and more and more. So it's an exciting time.
And the nice thing now, there are a lot of apps available that can kind of guide you. Oliver has a nice little script that he was going to just do with everyone today. But with this, as with other things that we've talked about, whether it's nutrition or sleep or activity, if you're feeling at a loss and you're having a hard time figuring out, well, yes, I want to do these things, but how? I would again encourage you to reach out to us at the Chanda Center. We're here to help give you ideas, help get you connected with resources as needed. And again, I encourage anyone, if you have any direct questions, you can certainly comment on the video. You could also email me directly with questions. And my email address is omstephen, STEPHEN 1@gmail.com.
Awesome. I know everybody's got stuff going on, so I might, if you're okay, I might do a quick 5-minute guided meditation to kind of wrap things up. And yeah, like you said, I really encourage people to reach out to our behavioral health people at the center. I encourage people to reach out to our acupuncturists and massage people. I know even a lot of our massage therapists have good information too. If you're comfortable with people and you have a dialogue, I encourage you to reach out. I know our staff and our people are here. Yes, I think that's great information. I encourage people to do that too. Okay, so if we're okay with it, I'm going to just do a quick little 5-minute meditation here, a little guided meditation. And then, yeah, we'll wrap it up. So
sounds good, Oliver.
Get my notes up. Okay, if everybody's ready, I would just recommend you find a comfortable place where you can be kind of alone with your thoughts. You can be seated or laying down, but you want your spine to be straight. Just give yourself a couple seconds to find that space. If you need to adjust, you can adjust however you want to. If you want to, do whatever you need to do, get your jitters out, go ahead, and I encourage you to do that. So I'm going to go on a more classical way, and where we focus on our breath. So you want to focus on your breath, but there are several places you can do it, wherever is most comfortable or whatever resonates with you. Um, some people find it really beneficial to put their hand on their stomach or their belly and feel their belly rise and fall as they breathe. Some people like to look at their upper chest, like I was speaking about earlier, and getting your intercostals, your muscles, your ribs to separate in between. You can like focus on your ribs separating and opening and closing. Some people find it beneficial to look at their breath at the tip of their nose and find the qualities of the breath. If it's warm, if it's cold, if it's resisted, if it's going in one nostril more than the other nostril. We want to focus on something around your breath. And so just think about your breath. When your hand's on your stomach, you can think rising as your breath goes in, falling as your breath goes out. Right now, we're not breath counting. We're not saying how long we can do. We're not doing any specific breath techniques. We're just having it come in naturally and exhale naturally and inhale naturally. So you want to repeat this over and over. In, out, warm, cool, expand, contract. Repeat it, but very soon, very quickly, within seconds for me usually, I notice thoughts start to enter my mind. And don't be alarmed, that's what thoughts do. Our mind is made to think. If it's not thinking, it's not doing what it's supposed to do. So you want to acknowledge that. I've recently come in contact with a meditation technique called brain. So when you get your thoughts, you want to recognize it. Like, hello, I noticed for myself, I'm having a lot of fear lately. It's very subtle, but it's persistent. And it's hard for me to recognize, but I recognize. So like, I'm going to say, like, I'm going to recognize it, R. I'm going to say, hello, fear. I recognize you, fear. And just recognize it. And that's really hard. A lot of times, then our guilt will come in, our judgment will come in. I'm not supposed to have fear. I need to push fear away. I need to, I need to resist it. When we find something we don't like, we resist it. I've also heard when you resist, what we resist, persist. And this meditation is coming from Tara Brach, the RAIN method. So R is to recognize your feelings. A is to allow or accept your feelings. So I'm going to allow myself to have fear. I'm going to allow, even though my judgment is like, don't like fear. I'm going to allow myself to have fear, allow it to be there. I'm going to recognize it. Hello, fear. I'm going to allow it, like, give it some space. Like, okay, don't resist it. Like, let my fear be there. So that's the A. The I is I'm going to investigate, or I'm going to be inquisitive about my fear. How does it make me feel? Where am I feeling my fear? Am I feeling it in my throat? Am I feeling it in my abdomen, my stomach? Am I feeling it in my heart? Investigate where your fear is. And again, don't be judgmental. Allow it to exist. Allow your fear to be there. Or whatever emotion it is. Guilt. Frustration. Anger. Even happiness. If you recognize happiness, investigate your happiness, allow your happiness. So then I is investigate. Oh, I'm sorry, I already did I. So then N is to nurture or become non-possessive over it. You want to recognize it and you want to nurture it and allow it to be there. You don't want to push it away. So allow your thoughts to be there and nurture your thought when you have it. Don't, when I have the fear, I want to acknowledge the fear, and I want to tell myself it's okay to have the fear. And then try to go back to my breath. After I've done all that stuff, go back to my breath. In, out, And like I said, the medicine is going back. It's not how many times, how many breaths you take without being distracted. You know, some people are like, I did 200 breaths. That's really not the goal. The goal is to come back after you've been distracted. The medicine is coming back. So it's not how many times you do a breath, it's how many times you come back after you've been distracted. And stay with that for as long as you can. And that's how I recommend doing a breathing guided meditation.
I think those are all really good ideas, Oliver. Um, I always think it's important, you pointed out a lot of this already, is the whole idea of mindfulness is, again, you're not going to eliminate thoughts. It's about how you respond to those thoughts. And the first part is allowing them to exist. So we fear stress or fear, and our first tendency is to try to avoid it. And that just creates a lot of dissonance in the system. It leads us to do a lot of, it works against our good self-care, and it tends to lead us down paths where we may be using substances, foods, other activities to try and keep those feelings down. So the whole idea of mindfulness is getting comfortable and recognizing that this isn't, I'm not enjoying this, but it's not directly harmful to me. And if I can sit with it and go through those steps that Oliver talked about, it can seem really scary, but it takes a lot of the power away if you go through that process. And I like Jack Kornfield, who's been offering a lot of mindfulness stuff recently. He often uses the phrase of, when these thoughts come up in his mind, it's, he acknowledges them and he recognizes why they might be coming up, but then also thanking those thoughts. I know you're looking out for me, but I have this. And the ability, when we give ourselves that space, and so if we practice that mindfulness and something gets thrown at us, we hopefully have cultivated that ability to sit with it for a little bit before we just respond reflexively because we're in a distressful situation. So it's about trying to put a little space there. It's not trying to eliminate our thoughts, but to recognize they oftentimes come independent of us. And so we can look at them, we can see what they're saying, and then we can kind of let them go. And so that's the idea of non-attachment. It's not stepping away from the world. If anything, you develop these skills so you can be more effective in the world. It's about giving them space, recognizing them, and then being able to move on from there and make appropriate, good decisions for yourself. So now we've been talking for a while. I've been talking mostly. I'm glad, Oliver, you had some time. Just wanted to review some of the stuff that we talked about and just emphasize in particular. So all this information is available in written format. I got a little thrown off earlier because I had some graphics I was going to try and use to guide the talk, and I was having trouble pulling them up and being able to share them on the screen while we were recording. So we'll make sure that those are all available to you. If there's any additional information you want, resource, references for research, et cetera, to support these things so you can feel comfortable doing them, more than happy to provide them. Again, best way to contact me is email omstephen, STEPHEN1 @gmail.com. I appreciate your time. Thank you, Oliver, for joining today. Hope people find this helpful and another tool, and hopefully we'll all be getting together in person soon.
Thanks for having me. And yep, I encourage everybody to breathe. And thank you for having me again.